Today we're going to be talking about differentiating instruction for students in Tiers 2 and Tiers 3 of RTI. This video is going to look specifically at the subject of English language arts. In English language arts, there are several areas of study that are most commonly studied by students and looked at in classrooms. The first of these is reading, and that can be anything from reading literary novels to poetry to informational texts or scholarly research. And then students engage in a lot of writing. Depending on the grade, students could be writing anything from poetry to memos to essays to really any sort of writing. And then students engage in speaking a lot in English language arts. That could be presentations, anything from presentations to students working in group discussions, small group discussions, classroom discussions, really anything where they're speaking. Students are going to be doing those sorts of things in the English language arts classroom. So for this presentation, first we're going to look at how instruction can be differentiated for students with regards to reading. So looking at reading, what might students struggle with when it comes to reading? Well, there are three areas where students most notably struggle when it comes to reading, and those are fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. For the sake of this presentation, I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm going to look specifically at the area of reading comprehension and how we can help our students gain comprehension when it comes to reading. Reading comprehension has a lot to do with organizing concepts. As a teacher, it's very helpful if we can help our students by providing them ways to organize specific concepts in literature. Now I'm going to look specifically at organizing concepts in literature that would be like a novel or a play or anything like that. And a couple of examples of that might be, number one, organizing the main ideas of the text. So, theme, that could be the different motifs that the author is trying to get across or anything of that sort. And then the second area is going to be the main events of the literary piece, and that could be the plot points, so rising action, climax, falling action. And then the third area of literary concepts where students are going to need to have organizational skills is comparing and keeping track of different characters within a story. Now, this third one, comparing different characters, is where I'm going to use the example of how a teacher can help to assist a student in organizing the concepts of a novel. So we're going to be looking specifically at comparing different characters. A tool that works really well for comparing characters in a novel is a graphic organizer. Specifically for this, we're going to look at a Venn diagram. Now, graphic organizers can be used in many different areas of the classroom, but for this presentation specifically, I'm going to show you how you could potentially use a Venn diagram to compare two different characters. Remember, this the use of a Venn diagram is not at all limited to this use. You can use it in many different ways, but this is how our presentation is going to go. So say we're comparing two characters. On the left we have Average Joe, and on the right we have Cool Guy Mike. So for a Venn diagram, you would draw two circles overlapping with, so you'd have a left-hand writing space, a middle writing space, and a right-hand writing space. So in the left-hand middle space, we're going to write characteristics about Average Joe. We'll talk about the coffee that he drinks, what kind of car he drives, little things like that, so that we have our character of Average Joe straight. You might want to encourage your students to also, in these areas, include textual evidence to support what they're finding, so that it encourages them to really dig into the text and not only find generalizations, but also provide specifics from the text so that you're holding them accountable for reading. Now we're going to look at Cool Guy Mike, talk about the Harley that he drives, how his favorite band is Metallica, and get some characteristics of him there. So then you'll see that we move to the middle. Now we have in our left-hand column, we have Average Joe, and in our right-hand column, we have Cool Guy Mike, and in the middle, we're going to talk about what these characters might share, or what are some qualities that they both have in common. So we'll talk about how they both have a dog, they both live on the same street, they attend the neighborhood barbecue that's discussed in the story, and they're both males that are relatively the same age, and they're both protagonists in the story. So when we pull back here, you can see students would have a visual depiction of a text, and this is something that would help them to organize their ideas and thoughts as they're going through a story. This Venn diagram is just one example of a type of graphic organizer that you might choose to use in your classroom, but it shows that making text something that is not necessarily visual, turning it visual and breaking it down and organizing it is something that students, especially in tiers 2 and 3 of RTI, would benefit from when they are trying to build text comprehension through organization of key features and points in a text. Now moving on, we're going to be looking at the area of writing. So what are some things that students might struggle with when it comes to writing in the English language arts classroom? There are a lot of things that you could talk about, but for this presentation I'm going to look specifically at the areas of mechanics, voice and creativity, and sentence and paragraph organization. These are just 3 examples of many different areas where you could find difficulties with student writing. And I want to look specifically then at number 3, sentence and paragraph organization, and how as teachers we can help to make this concept easier for students. So when it comes to writing sentences and paragraphs, there are certain elements that go to create this specific type of organization. You're going to want students to know where to place the main ideas of their paragraph or sentence. You're going to want your students to know where to place the supporting content of the paragraphs and sentences. That would be like proof, citations, anything like that. You're going to want students to know where to place the introduction and conclusion of a paragraph. Now that's something that might be obvious, but students are going to need to know, how to craft those and how to structure those and exactly where they do go within a paragraph. So as teachers, how can we support students through this process? Well, again, it helps to take this information and make it visual for students. So there are many different ways that you can do that, but one that seems to make the most sense for students is the hamburger model. So in a hamburger, obviously you have the top bun, the middle of the burger, and the bottom bun. Now the top bun is going to represent the introduction sentence. The middle of the burger, all of the juicy, the patty, the cheese, the lettuce, tomatoes, all of that are going to represent the body sentences of the paragraph, the details. So you've got all of the details, and then you've got the bottom bun of your burger. Now these all kind of combine, and obviously you need your buns to hold everything in, you need your details to make it taste good, and all of this put together, you have a tasty looking cheeseburger. For students, this visual really helps them to actually see how they should be structuring their paragraph. Something that you can do is when you're having them write a paper or writing a paragraph, you can actually provide them with this model that has areas where they would fill in the information that they need for their paragraph. And the visual, number 1, helps them to actually see it, and then having the little boxes that point where to fill stuff in helps them actually create the structure of it. And then from there, after students fill this out, it's really just a matter of putting everything together to have their paragraph. So the cheeseburger model is a great way, again, to turn something from being conceptual into something that is visual for students. The third area where students are going to be doing a lot of their work in the English language arts classroom is speaking. Now, this can be anything from giving a speech in front of the class to having a one-on-one discussion with a partner to being involved in a group discussion, but one way or another, students will succeed, have a much better chance of succeeding in the classroom if they are able to efficiently speak and listen to different thoughts and ideas that are being presented and talked about. So when it comes to speaking, what are some things that students might struggle with? Obviously, nerves is one, but looking more at the mechanics of speaking, students might have difficulty processing information and constructing a response when it comes to discussion especially. So breaking this down, there are two ways that a teacher can help to scaffold and provide support for students when it comes to coming up with ideas and constructing responses for discussion. The two areas where teachers can provide resources and extra scaffolding is through time and through practice. So first, looking at time, when a teacher is asking a question or having a classroom discussion, it is very important for them to give students time to respond. Now, there may be students who, when you ask a question, their hand is going to fly up right away. But for students who are especially in Tiers 2 and Tiers 3 of RTI and other students with learning disabilities or anything of the sorts, those students might need more time to answer a question. So by a teacher simply calling on the student who raises his hand up every single time, you're not giving the other students in the class time to process and think about the question. So something that you might want to do is provide adequate wait time. That would be by asking a question and allowing for the whole class to think about it for a set amount of time, perhaps 20 to 30 seconds, maybe even more, and then calling on students. In doing this, students will have less anxiety over discussions. They know that there'll be more time to potentially think about the question. It'll make them more likely to actively participate in the discussion. If they're getting a chance to speak and if they're getting a chance to think about it, these students will be more likely to actually participate. And then in doing so, students will become more involved in the actual learning that is occurring in the lessons. And they will learn more information because they're able to participate in those discussions simply because the teacher gave them more time to think about questions and thus putting less stress on their brain to process the information. The second thing that a teacher can give their students when it comes to discussions is practice. Obviously, practice makes perfect, but there are specific ways that a teacher can sort of simulate the discussion environment at a low stakes, in a low stakes way for students so that they're able to practice their discussion skills and then use them in areas later on that are maybe a little more high stakes. A great place for students or teachers to do this is to create small group discussion environments. This is great for students and preparing them for large group class discussions, and it also scaffolds the necessary communication skills that they're going to need in a low stakes environment. In a small group discussion, students are also able to learn from one another, which is a very key element of this because in the classroom, obviously, you're going to have students all across the spectrum. You're going to have students who are extremely gifted, and then there also may be students who are in different special education classes or are on IEPs or are in the higher tiers of RTI, specifically tiers 2 and 3, who could substantially benefit from working with their peers, not working with an adult, but instead working with one another to come to a common consensus and being able to contribute and listen to others in the give and take environment that is small group discussions. So what does this look like? Well, an example of a small group discussion activity could be think, pair, share. Now, just as it is explained, just as the name is explained, the activity is in 3 different steps. The first step is students are given a question and they're given time on their own to think about the question and to craft a response. After they've had time to think about it, students pair up with another student and they discuss the question with one another. So this is where that intimate one-on-one discussion is going to come. It could be, groups of 2, groups of 3, but in a small group, students are going to get a chance to listen to one another and to have their own voices heard as well. This also gives students a chance to collaborate and really just gain information and knowledge from one another. After they've had a chance to do this collaboration, the groups report out to the class and they discuss the information that they talked about in their small groups. Now this gives students that opportunity to practice their speaking skills in front of a larger group. However, it's not doing it in a high stakes way because students have already had time to craft their response and to think about the information that they hope to share with the rest of the class. So in a sense, this isn't necessarily practicing the cognitive processing skills that students will need to craft a response, but instead it practices more of the mechanics of being able to speak and articulate in front of a large group, which in the long run will substantially benefit students in nearly every area of academics. Giving students a chance to practice these communication skills and giving them time when it comes to answering questions in a class will undoubtedly help to create a more comfortable classroom environment and will help students build those necessary skills that they're going to need for any sort of communication, whether that be in English language arts or any other area of academics. So these were just a couple of ways that as a teacher in the English classroom, you can help your students develop skills that they are going to need to succeed in this specific content area. And looking back at some of the things that we talked about, these are some small examples of ways that as a teacher you can provide scaffolding and differentiated instructions for students who may need that and for students who may need the extra assistance, specifically when you're looking at students who are on Tiers 2 and Tiers 3 of RTI.